The story begins where we see the main protagonist, Sito, brutally butchering monsters with his magic sword like it were a Black Friday sale. The leader of the team observed Sito's cruel actions and immediately kicked him out of the party with no notice. This was really bad for him, seeing that being a member of this party had been the only remarkable achievement he had accomplished in his entire life, and he no longer has access to their insurance. But the leader doesn't care in the slightest and threatens to crush the life out of him if he were ever to become a bandit. While Sito was out in the forest looking for something to eat as an unemployed man, and simultaneously thinking about what else he could possibly be doing since he can't exactly go work for a bank with his skill set, he heard a rustling in the bushes. Upon inspection, he stumbled upon a beautiful top-heavy girl who was named Satiz, but she appeared to be in critical condition for some reason. Satiz was a top-tier sorceress and also a leader of the demon army, but despite her reputable title and master's degrees, she wasn't even able to stand on her own 2 feet, so she fell unconscious at the mercy of Sito. He had been prepared for a fight, but now he thought he should probably make sure she was okay instead, so he carried her to a nearby log cabin and laid her in a bed there. Some hours later, she woke up startled at the sight of Sito's ugly face, but then she started to do something strange. Satiz was to mutter some strange words like "I'm sorry" and "forgive me," but that couldn't have been right since Sito's face gave off a horrendous vibe rather than an intimidating one. It had him so confused that he grabbed a table and hid behind it so she would know that he didn't pose any threat to her. For now at least. After she had calmed down, she recognized that Sito was a part of the hero party and is sure he plans to kill her, but explained that he had gotten his dumbass yeeted from the hero troop so he held no grudge against her. He then inquired about Sati's well-being, so she began to narrate how after she had challenged the hero troop several times and got her ass handed to her each and every time, her failures brought disappointment to the demon lord, so she was ordered to be executed. And on top of that, she had her rank stripped away from her, as well as her dignity, as she was also tortured at the hands of demons of far lower ranks than her, so the humiliation she endured was unimaginable. I would almost feel bad for her, but then again, she probably destroyed an orphanage or 2 during her reign of power, so it may have been deserved. On the day of her execution, she managed to avoid getting her subscription to life revoked by hiding in a nearby forest, which is when Sito found her. After Satiz had shared her sad story, it was Sito's turn, so he began to narrate exactly how he ended up where he is now. Since Sito was a child, he had always been ordered to fight and kill, and would get his guts kicked in if he didn't kick the gut of who he was told to, so he did as he was told. The adults were a little lenient on him since they knew that he was capable of wielding the magic sword, and he carried on living his life as a murder machine. But that tendency to kill without emotion is exactly what led to him being kicked out of the hero party. His team leader saw him as a mindless attacker whose sole purpose was to kill anything that crossed his path. He went on to remind Sito that the team was to serve as protection for humanity, and not a butcher shop, but Sito retorted saying if he didn't kill, he himself would get killed. Satiz asked whether it was really okay for him to be telling her all this, but he said it was fine seeing that he would never be returning to the kingdom again. It's not like he needed to anyways, he was treated as nothing but a weapon by the people, and as Fry his friends. Wait, what friends? After hearing Sito's sob story, Satiz laid down as they both pondered what one should do at a time like this. The next morning, after Sito had woken up, he was thinking about going out to train when he realized, wait, I don't have to do this anymore. His dumbass had forgotten that he is jobless, so with no morning obligations, he decided to go scouting for a bit. While scouting, he spotted a fruitful apple tree, so he leaped up and grabbed a tree branch to pluck the apple with his other hand. He had eaten a few apples already and realized just how tasty they were when all of a sudden, he falls from the tree to the ground, and as he looked up, he saw Satiz just awkwardly standing there doing nothing. Satiz noticed him staring at her and threw Sito into the air like an old sack of potatoes, causing him to fall face first on the ground. But his face can't get much worse, so it's alright. Satiz told him he was being a weirdo by standing in the shadows and watching her. But Sito had gotten to his feet to explain how he had the idea that they could eat the apples which he had picked for breakfast. Satiz grabbed an apple and gave a blushing stare at it, as if she was getting rizzed up by it. She then asked Sito why he saved her even though they were supposed enemies. He replied saying that he had already told her that he wasn't part of the hero troop anymore, so he's no longer getting paid to care about her war crimes. Therefore, Hell chose to ignore it. Satiz says that if he were to capture a former army executive like herself, he would be in the good graces of his former team, but replied saying that it didn't matter to him anymore. Satiz was baffled at how calm this guy was about losing everything he held, and even Sito himself didn't understand where his calmness of his had come from. Satiz realized that Sito had always carried a feeling of resignation on his shoulders for as long as he could remember, so his heart had grown used to the unfairness of life, which explained why he acts like he had given up on life. In that regard, the two were very much alike. Neither had anywhere to turn to or any future plans to move forward on, aimless and looking for a purpose. Just then, demons appeared and Satiz was frozen stiff in fear at the sight of them. The demons recognized Satiz as the coward who just barely escaped her execution and Sito a member of the hero party. They had sensed the presence of a human, so they came as soon as possible in hopes of having a heavy lunch. Right before the demons made their attempt to eat Satiz, they contemplated whether they should torture her some more before they begin. That's right, these were the douchebags who had tortured her in the past, and Satiz was terrified at the sight of them even though she was likely far stronger than them. The demons mentioned that they had a lot of fun playing with Satiz, and even went as far as to say they had begun to take a liking to playing with women after encountering her. Let's just hope they were talking about League of Legends when they said they were playing. While Sito was in his Street Fighter pose, the demons assumed he was a weakling, so they mockingly told him to ask for Satiz's help. But since Sito just stood around without moving, the demons grew annoyed and decided to strike them both to down. Suddenly, Sito stretched his arm in front of Satiz, implying that he was going to protect her. The ugly pig-faced demon charged at Sito with full force, but Sito drew his magic sword and countered by striking the demon in the chest, shocking everyone present with his overwhelming power he possessed. Sito jumped in the air and took position for an overhead sword attack, slashing the demon into two halves as he landed. However, there were still two other demons waiting for him, and Satiz feared that he couldn't handle two opponents at the same time even with the use of his magic sword. Despite her doubts, Sito surpassed her expectations and totally obliterated the demons with the aid of his magic sword, which contained power beyond human comprehension. The old swords date back to the mythological times and were quite special because not just anyone could wield it. Those who were deemed fit for the magical sword would excel on the battlefield with the immeasurable power of the sword in their hands. After Sito was done with his butchering, fighting, he turned and gave Satiz a very dead and cold look, asking if she was okay. Satiz was marveled at how normal Sito could act after he had led a total massacre. He replied simply saying that it was either he killed them or they both got killed. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and he's the butcher. He didn't want to die back there, so the bloodbath was the only clear solution since Talk no Jutsu probably wasn't going to work here. Satiz could tell that Sito was like this because of his experiences on the deadly battlefield. But for her, the battlefield was nothing more than her playground where she enjoyed seeing her enemies suffering as they died. But after getting a taste of that suffering, her pride has been crushed and her sadistic nature is in the past. She began to talk down to herself about how much of a worthless coward she was and how she froze in fear at the sight of a demon which was a lower rank than she was. She never realized how much of a weakling she was. Sito told her that it's okay to be a helpless loser sometimes, especially after being tortured, adding that he himself had once been like that. However, from Satiz's point of view, it was normal for humans to act in such a way because they are weak. But she was a demon, and demons are meant to be way stronger than humans. Sito replied saying that was all bullshit, as it didn't matter whether you were a human or a demon. They all killed each other, so they're all the same. After Sito's confusing yet touching speech, she said she didn't understand a single word he was saying. However, she was indebted to him for protecting her against those demons. She asked him what he was planning on doing from now on, and he replied saying that he was thinking of going on a journey. He mentioned that he had always admired mercenaries and had always wanted to have his own place. He then asked Satiz to come with him on this journey of his, but Satiz was hesitant to join because she had started to feel guilty after all those Make-A-Wish kids she killed. Sito managed to persuade her into following him on this journey, seeing as she didn't have anywhere else to go anyway, so she agreed to join him. He introduced himself to her as Sito, which meant destruction and tempest, which is definitely a name. I can already tell that his parents must have been very responsible people. She introduced herself as Satiz, and she told Sito to watch over and take care of her. We see Sito and Satiz moving down a road, except Sito was crawling in a sniper position because they were near the Demon King's territory and he assumed that there would be a sniper nearby. So he advises Satiz to get down too. But Satiz assured him that the aim of the demons was worse the stormtroopers, so there were no snipers in the demon army. It was getting out of hand, so Satiz yelled, demanding Sito just walk normally already, so Sito reluctantly stood to his feet. He noticed that Satiz's hands were still trembling, so he reassured her that if any demon were to come after them again, he would deal with them as it was his duty as a soldier, though Satiz then reminded him that his sorry ass was currently not a soldier. We see them both sitting under a tree where Satiz was cutting up some delicious fruits for them both to eat. Sito complimented her fruit-cutting skills and she replied saying that it was all thanks to her nimble fingers, intriguing Sito as to what else those hands can do. She assumed Sito was used to eating much better than this while he was still with the hero group, but he replied saying that he never got to eat food half as good as this, back with the hero party. They would tell him that he couldn't do anything but fight, so he was to ration his food and eat the bare minimum to keep him alive. Most times, he ate in the dark, just so that he wouldn't be seen by others. While Sito was narrating his story, Satiz remembered that he was staggering when they fought a while back, which was probably because he hadn't been eating right. She was sure Sito would want to take revenge against the hero party for the way they treated him, especially with all the power he possessed, yet he cared indifferent about it. Sito mentioned that he would want to go to the city if they ever escaped the forest, so Satiz suggested a nice place which they could go to located in the city. A public bath. She mentioned that she had been admiring a famous public bath which was located in the city for quite some time now, and with all the time they've been in the forest, she's probably starting to smell a little musty. Sito liked the idea but asked if there was a time limit for being in the bath, so Satiz replied saying that there was no time limit, but he shouldn't stay in there for too long else he would look like an old grandma, and at the same time he would get dizzy. She then asked Sito if he had any money, but our boy is flat broke and apparently he didn't even know what money was in the first place. Satiz called out his broke ass and informed him that she was just so happens to be swimming in the big bucks, so they both decided to set out and have a relaxing bath while also finding a place to stay for the night. They arrived at Clay Shut City, the place which they planned on getting their relaxing baths. Satiz advised Sito to stay in the bath for a while so that he would wash his body properly. Sito replied saying that he understood. Satiz arrived half naked at the bathroom. She laid down and enjoyed how refreshing the bath was, then realized how ironic it was for her to be relaxing in a human public bath when she was a member of the demon army and despised humans and everything related to them. She also realized that if not for Sito's act of humanity by saving her ass, she would have been sent to the afterlife, so he decided that she should thank him sincerely. But not in the way you're thinking though. She wondered how Sito was behaving himself in the bath, hoping he didn't have the urge to swim since the bath was really large. Surely he couldn't be that childish. But indeed, Sito was that childish as he walked into the bath with his body that had never heard of leg day, and immediately wanted to let loose and swim all over the place. The temperature was perfect, there was no time limit, and he was just really excited about it. The conditions were perfect for swimming, so he decided to become a fish in the water. But suddenly, he felt a palm on his shoulder, and a dude who looked like a bootleg Wolverine told him that it was prohibited to swim there. Sito sat in the bath calmly like a good boy while he listened to the stranger tell him about the benefits of a good bath. He asked the stranger if he was a mercenary, and he replied saying that he was, adding that one day he wanted to live life according to his own principles. Their goals in life were similar as Sito wished for the same thing, along with traveling places and having a house of his own. He complimented Sito's dream and also asked whether Satiz, the sexy girl he came in with, was going to be participating in that dream of his. This angered Sito, so the stranger made it clear that he wasn't planning on snatching her away from him. He can't start making enemies in his downtime, otherwise he would never get a chance to relax. If Sito wanted to face him, then he would have to do it on the battlefield. Sito was baffled by this guy's personality, but aside from that odd personality of his, he just wasn't a normal person. As the stranger was leaving, he shared that his name was Holmes and he hoped to see Sito again sometime. After he was done in with his bath, he met Satiz outside, so they both head to a nearby diner where Satiz suggested that they sit down and order some food. Satiz had already ordered, so Sito asked her what it was, and it turned out to be a huge and attractive buffet before him. Satiz told Sito that he could have as much as he wanted, as this was her way of thanking him, since if not for his noble act, she wouldn't be alive right now. Sito began to stuff his face and ate as much as he could, as if it were his last supper. He said the meat was very tender and he had never eaten anything as good as that before. Satiz advised him to slow down while he was eating. After all, the food wasn't going anywhere. Sito himself realized that he had been eating like a filthy, disgusting pig. So his two brain cells clicked, and he also realized was that Satiz was encouraging table manners. Satiz was shocked that he even knew what table manners were, and proceeded to call him an unusual person who was so mature, but yet still so childish. Sito explained that his adult mentality was all because, as a wielder of the magic sword, during battles, he would have lots of interactions with adults and he was just imitating the ones around him. Satiz simply said that was why she envied him. Sito replied saying, that while he was fighting and imitating the ones around him, he had forgotten who he truly was, so someone who could both get angry and laugh at the right times was what he was really envious of. Satiz came to a conclusion that Sito was just different. Even though he came from a rough background, you couldn't tell, simply because of how honest and just he was. She also sensed the feelings of not only a soldier in him, but there was also the aspect of a human present in him. After the meal, Sito thanked Satiz for the food, and Satiz remarked, saying she was able to understand him a little more after that evening together. Sito was confused by her statement, but she didn't clarify, instead calling Sito a wonderful young man. And on hearing this, Sito's face turned red as he began to blush. Satiz asked Sito whether he had a good time. Sito was a lonely and friendless dude, so he had never had fun before. But tonight, he finally knew what having fun felt like. Satiz suggested that they took a walk, so Sito replied saying that he wanted to take his time walking with her, whatever that meant. She then teased him about his very poor attempt at flirting. She then said it would be okay to take a walk at night, especially if it were with him. Sito had unlocked a new and very valuable skill. Riz. Meanwhile, the hero team were facing some difficulties and weren't doing so well themselves. The hero team were surrounded by a pack of hungry wolves, so the team leader, who was named Reed, decided they should use the divide and conquer technique to subdue their enemy. Angelica, who was their team's sorceress, held her mystic staff and attempted to use some magic to launch an attack. However, the wolves appeared to have totally outnumbered them, so she cried out saying that she lacked the time to launch her spell, asking one of her teammates to create a distraction so she could cast her spell successfully. Angelica's teammate, Hydra, yelled back that creating a distraction would be impossible due to the large number of wolves. A wolf then immediately tried attacking her, but she managed to defend by placing her sword blade in its mouth. Unfortunately for them, more monsters were approaching, so Reed made the conclusion that they had been totally outnumbered and would get jumped if they stayed, so they had to retreat. Angelica reminded him that their luggage was still back there, and it had the anime figurines in it. But as painful as it may be, they're gonna have to leave them behind. After their retreat, Reed had noticed that he had fucked up and retreated too far out of the Demon King territory, so they are back where they started, only with no food, no shelter, and missing thousands of dollars of Nezuko figures. Angelica suddenly started to have a mental breakdown, complaining that they are back to square one with nothing to show for all the effort they've put in up till now. Hydra tried to calm her down by saying it was beyond their power as they were attacked unexpectedly while they all were about to set up camp. However, Angelica never learned how to accept responsibility and proceeded to blame everyone else on the team aside from herself. If only they had given a proper distraction, then she could have finished casting her spell. Reed was still torn by the loss of his precious figurines, so he told Angelica to shut the hell up for a bit while he thinks. Angelica took that personally and began to pour all the blame for their situation on Reed for kicking Sito out of the team. To her, Sito was an incredibly useful pawn that did all the dirty work for them, so with him gone, the team's overall capabilities have been greatly reduced. Reed retorted saying that Sito was nothing more than a killing machine whose power brought death and destruction. But Angelica proceeded to call Reed a naive bastard since it doesn't matter so long as that death and destruction is being done to the demons. In the middle of Angelica's rant, Hydra points out that Sito's expulsion was something that they all agreed to do, so the blame isn't on Reed for that one. Angelic turned to Hydra and called her a basic bitch who could only fight with her hands. She then placed her finger on Hydra's lips and mockingly asked her how she would be able to travel anywhere with such trash skill without getting attacked. Hydra was not going to stand for such levels of disrespect and was ready to throw hands if Angelica continued insulting the martial arts which her father had established. It didn't matter that they were teammates or that they were lost with no supplies. Hydra's hands are rated for Angelica. Before a fight could begin, their bald teammate yelled, telling them to stop bickering since they should just be glad their sorry asses aren't dog food right now. They should all just get some rest to calm down before they decide what to do from here. But there is still one problem, as Angelica points out that they always force Sito to keep watch while they tested, so who will do it now that he's gone? And seeing what she is getting at, Reed volunteers to be the lookout for the night, but he can't help but wonder why all of this is happening, not them. While the hero party is suffering, Sito and Satiz are busy having a blast while exploring the city. Satiz was busy admiring the beautiful buildings, but Sito was even more busy admiring the architecture of Satiz's curvaceous face. They arrive at a hotel, where Satiz apologized since this was the only room available, so Sito would have to share it with her. Sito told her it wasn't an issue for him since they could just sleep on the floor while she used the bed. But Satiz was having none of that and told him that they would just share the bed together. She then said she was going to go change into her nightwear, and Sito was shocked that she would be okay with this. She then proceeded to embarrass Sito up by saying she would be okay with it as long as it was with him. However, she thumped his head, making it clear to him that touching her was off limits. After this encounter, Sito thought to himself that he had always been living his life as the adults had instructed him to. Taking the lead in heavy assault missions were no problem to him. But he was so bitchless that he had never experienced something like this before, being alone with the one thing he never got in life, a girl. Sito thought hardly about what he was going to do in a situation like this. He then drew the conclusion that this may be his chance to jump out the window. A few minutes later, Satiz appeared in a hot brown night outfit. Inquiring about why he was freaking out in the corner over there, Sito looked up and thought to himself that this was the first time which he had seen her defenseless. He was left speechless, and Satiz asked him whether he was going to say anything to compliment her outfit. But Sito kept on acting like a shy loser. She sensed that he was avoiding eye contact with her due to his shyness. He urged her not to make fun of him because it was a rare occurrence for him to encounter the female species, so he didn't want to do anything he might regret. She pointed out that while she told him he couldn't touch her, she never said he couldn't look. But at this moment, Sito was fight a battle to keep himself from getting bricked up. Wondering what an adult would do in a situation like this, Satiz further assured him that she would make sure he gets a good night's sleep today. Later that night, we see the two of them laying down together, and Sito couldn't sleep owing to the fact that Satiz was sleeping so close to him, and it was impossible for him to stop thinking about her attractive body. But it was a war of attrition. He would not fall for her seductive charms and decided to stay still until day broke. Moments later, Sito sensed a pleasing scent, like that of flowers, coming from Satiz, and suddenly, Satiz's voice was heard telling Sito that she promised to ensure that he was going to get a good night's rest. So she cast a magic spell on him which put him at ease and made him fall fast asleep. After Sito had fallen asleep, she stayed and watched over him, ensuring his sound sleep. The following morning, Sito had awoken and he noticed that he had woken up at a later time than usual. Just then, he remembered his embarrassing encounter with Satiz and couldn't believe that it had happened in real life. He then made himself look even more dumb by falling flat on his face while asking himself what the actual hell he was doing. Sito looked up and noticed Satiz, who called him for him to get ready so they could both go and get some breakfast, but she noticed that Sito wasn't at ease. She inquired about his condition, while at the same time being about an inch away from his face, which made him blush even more. He then reassured her that he was fine and would soon be ready, so he gets dressed, and they head out. Sito noticed a feeling which he had never experienced in his entire life, claiming to feel a sharp pain in his chest. They arrived at a breakfast diner, where they saw a buffet of breakfast dishes. Sito couldn't believe he was going to eat all that food all just for breakfast. While they were eating, Sito couldn't help but stare at Satiz's pumpkins the entire time. Satiz noticed that he had glaring and glancing around for a while, but he replied saying that it was nothing. However, she knew exactly what he was staring at. Satiz noticed that Sito had stained his mouth with sauce, so she helped him by wiping it off with her finger. After she had wiped it, she proceeded to lick her finger, which totally and utterly shocked. She also mentioned to Sito that she noticed that he had been staring at her busty chest, which made the Sito to be filled with the infamous spirit of shame. So he began to chant the words, "I am a soldier," hoping that his little soldier would stop standing at attention. Due to the awkwardness, he suggested that they both go their separate ways, saying he was thinking about doing some sightseeing around the town. But Satiz then asked why he didn't want her to come with him. She further teased him, saying that she wanted him to explore her body, the city, with her alone, which made Sito almost go unconscious. Satiz then admitted that she might have gone a little too far with the teasing and agreed to his suggestion of going their separate ways for the day. She mentioned that she wanted to go check out a location anyway, so she urged him to enjoy himself like a normal kid would and not like a soldier. While he was strolling through the city, he realized that it was all thanks to Satiz that he had gained all these new experiences. But suddenly, he bumped into a person who appeared to be Holmes, the scumbag from the public bath. Holmes apologized for bumping into Sito like that. He hadn't noticed him, probably due to his tiny body. He then asked why Sito wasn't with Satiz this time. But Sito didn't give a clear reply, so Holmes concluded that it would be best if things were kept private. Holmes mentioned that he had some free time off work, so he insisted that they went for a walk. And on that walk, Sito observed the beautiful sights all over the town. He asked Holmes what job he was working, so he replied saying that he was a mercenary hired to transport the materials harvested from subjugated monsters. Holmes mentioned that Sito could watch the mercenaries work because it was free, and it would also make a good dating spot for him and Satiz. Sito corrected his misconception, telling him that he and Satiz weren't like that. Yet, Holmes replied saying that it was totally obvious since he has seen the way Sito was looking at Satiz. He urged Sito not to beat himself up because it wasn't easy for him to keep his cool with a girl as hot as Satiz. He stared off into the distance where he noticed a huge carriage full of a rare species of dragon. Holmes mentioned to Sito that the dragon must have been dead by now, but that wasn't what Sito was worried about. He was concerned about Satiz, who hadn't recovered from her PTSD. He also felt that her fear of monsters would still be present. Holmes and Sito had strolled for a while, so Holmes decided it was time for him to go. Before they departed, Sito realized that he had never made his name aware of Holmes before. Just as he was about to say it, Holmes interrupted him, saying he didn't need to know his name, that he would be calling him boy. As soon as they both departed, Sito sprinted towards the direction of Satiz, feeling very concerned and worried about her. Just then, he met a man who cautioned him not to continue running in that direction since there was a dragon terrorizing the plaza. He saw that dragon which that had seen earlier, but it was somehow alive and terrorizing the city. Sito couldn't believe his eyes. Someone fricked up their job. His first instinct was to draw his magic sword, but he remembered the promise he had made to Satiz, and drawing his sword is not something a regular kid would do. Plus, with so many people nearby, drawing his sword would lead to several accidental kill streaks on the civilians, and he can't have that happen. Sito asked that man if he had seen a woman wearing glasses and a tight black suit with a dumpy in the back, but the man told him this was no time to be trying to get hoes. A man behind them mentioned that he had seen her. She had told Sito that she had some business in the plaza, which meant that Satiz had to be nearby. Sito didn't want to break his promise, but he didn't want to lose her even more, so he vowed that he was going to save her. He started looking around for a weapon he could use aside from the magic sword since he isn't able to use it here. A while ago, Satiz was in the city and had finished gathering the information which she desired, when she saw a merchant drawing everyone's attention so they all would watch him harvesting materials from a dead monster. The merchant struck its leg with an axe, which made the monster scream in pain, indicating that it was still alive. Satiz was scared and was also face to face with the monster. She planned on using her magic to subdue it, but she appeared to be frozen in fear. At this juncture, Satiz had accepted that it was time to become dog food. With a smirk on her face, she reminisced the memories which she and Sito had shared, saying that those memories made it okay for her to live. She fell to her knees, ready to accept her fate, when suddenly, Sito appeared right in front of her dressed in a very ugly mask, doing this with the hope of not standing out. The civilians wondered whether the masked hero was a monkey or not, but who or whatever he was there to save the day. Sito stood opposite to the dragon, and while Satiz was screaming his name, the monster attacked him, but he managed to evade in time. It swiped its foot at Sito, but he dodged again and ran up its outstretched foot, landing a clean blow on it. The civilians were amazed at how such a tiny person was able to dominate a creature as big as that, and they began to cheer him on in order to boost his confidence. However, Satiz noticed that he couldn't keep on fighting at that rate, because the sword which he was using to fight wasn't the magic sword but rather a regular one, and as a result of the speed at which he was slashing, the sword was on the verge of breaking, so he somehow needed to be able to land a heavy blow before that happened. There was a large explosion which flung a huge rock at Satiz's direction, when suddenly, Sito used his ugly mask to block the blow from the rock, which in turn cracked the mask. Sito said he was going to deal with the monster, so they should all just make a run for it. Meanwhile, Satiz realized how much of a worthless coward she was being and didn't want to remain as dead weight this far into the story. Suddenly, magical explosion occurred aimed straight at the monster, which were obviously Satiz doing. Satiz stood confidently beside Sito, saying that she was going to back him up, and after a series of magical explosions, the civilians wondered if that had killed the monster. However, the point of the explosions weren't to kill the monster, rather it was to create smoke which would give Sito a chance to make use of his magic sword. Sito smirked, throwing that useless sword away. He then proceeded to draw his magic sword and let off a single slash, splitting the monster in two. The smoke had cleared. Lo and behold, the monster dragon had been slew. After their victory, the civilians asked where their hero was, so that they could celebrate him. But before they knew it, Sito had disappeared without a trace, so Satiz followed behind him. Satiz arrived at their hotel room, where we see Sito sitting on a bed, who pretended he had been inside the entire day, saying that he heard she ran into some trouble at the South Plaza and inquiring about her condition. She thanked Sito for his intervention at the plaza, but Sito denied that he had anything to do with it, giving himself a fake alibi of just returning to their room a little ahead of time. Satiz mentioned that the people outside were causing a ruckus, looking for the hero who had saved them from the monster, but she supposed that they weren't going to find him for some time. She then held Sito's hand, thanking him for keeping his promise to her since thanks to him, she had managed to regain her confidence on the battlefield and move forward as well. They then both had a cute moment where Satiz embraced him. With all that had happened, they both thought it was a good time to change scenery by leaving the city, so they decided to go a village which was located in the north. Meanwhile, in the Demon Kingdom, we see the Demon Lord seated on his throne, and one of his servants apologizing for not being able to find Satiz. Apparently, ever since she had left the Demon King's domain, the demon army had kept on losing to the humans. The Demon King didn't give a shit because he just knew that Satiz was still alive and just wandering around somewhere, so he demanded they sent out soldiers to look for her. However, if they were to dispatch any more soldiers, it would stretch their army population too thin. Yet the Demon King replied saying that it wouldn't be an issue and asked the servant to send a demon named Sebek to the battlefield. Sebek was a half-demon who was a battle junkie, so the Demon King wanted to exploit him to the fullest. The servant arrived at Sebek's domain, telling him that the Demon Lord has approved and had a mission for him. But Sebek wasn't interested in that and only saw this as a reason to kill more people. We saw Sito and Satiz walking down a peaceful road when Satiz noticed they had walked quite a distance from the city. According to her map, they would soon arrive at a village. Sito noticed a mountain accumulating snow for years since the temperature at high altitudes was lower than on the ground. He then added that if the war were to end, they'd be able to roam the world freely. Sito said he hoped the world would be at peace. Suddenly, he noticed a person who had appeared to have collapsed. At first, Sito thought it was an enemy trying to ambush them, but they then realized how dumb it would be for an enemy to ambush them out in the open like that. They went closer to the collapsed individual, and it appeared to be a human woman. As Sito was about to check her condition, she immediately woke up and brought out her cup, which she used to beg. She proceeded to ask him for food and water, as she hadn't eaten or drunk anything in the past 3 days. As Sito was still assessing the situation, she immediately began to attack him with swift blows, as if she had undergone training. Sito noticed that she was very fast and didn't move like an amateur. However, she wasn't something he couldn't handle. He then used his martial arts skills to restrain her and pinned her to the ground, and her stomach made a loud growl. They then gave her water to drink, and she gulped it down like there was no tomorrow. After she had composed herself, she apologized for her previous behavior, saying that it was due to horrendous hunger. They accepted her apology and asked whether she was a soldier and what she was doing out there. She replied by introducing herself as Killam, a soldier assigned to Benjamin Village but got lost on her way there. Sito and Satiz then introduced themselves, and after Killam had heard their names, she thought they sounded familiar. Sito mentioned that they were on their way to Benjamin Village and asked Killam whether she would like to come along. Satiz called him on it and wondered whether her tagging along would reveal their true identities to her. However, Sito told her not to worry, that if anything were to happen, he was going to handle it, and he also didn't sense any harmful intentions from her. For some reason, Sito thought that she gave off the same vibe and aura as that Holmes guy whom he met at the public bath. He didn't think that they had the same personality, but he just felt that they had something in common. After a while, they arrived at Benjamin Village, so the first thing Killam wished to do was to greet the mayor. She asked Sito and Satiz to accompany her so they could introduce themselves to her. While they were walking to the mayor's office, Sito was amazed that he finally arrived at the place famously known as the Village of Weirdos, which sounded like the perfect place for him. Moments later, they reached the mayor's office, where she welcomed Killam back to the village. She noticed that Killam had come back with some visitors. The mayor then introduced herself to them as Scarlet and asked for Sito's and Sati's names, so they introduced themselves, and Killam mentioned that they were her benefactors. Satiz then lied, saying that she was a relative to Sito. She assumed that if the mayor thought that they were relatives, it would put her at ease. The mayor asked what brought them to her village. Satiz replied, saying that she and Sito were on a trip, and she also pleaded that she allowed them to stay a few days in the village. The mayor was so generous that she offered to lend them a house that had been vacated just recently. Satiz was shocked at how generous this lady was being, especially to a pair of random outsiders. Scarlet explained that almost everyone in the village came from the outside, and all kinds of people are attracted to the village. She then drew the conclusion that it was fate that had brought them to the village. Just then, a messenger bird flew in to deliver a special message for Mayor Scarlet, which was a rare occurrence, so she knew it was of an important matter. After reading the message, Mayor Scarlet suggested that they stay in the village for a longer period than they had planned for their safety. On hearing that, Satiz immediately got worried and inquired about the situation. Scarlet explained that the Demon King's army is going to make a comeback with full force, and neighboring countries had been nervous, leading to the closure of their national borders and checking stations. Scarlet rushed to find Killam because she knew that she had to alert her at once. Cedo overheard Satiz muttering to herself about the Demon King coming back, saying that it should have been difficult for him, given the circumstances. Satiz had a sudden realization but immediately decided to drop it, since they had made it to such a peaceful village. Meanwhile, the hero group was in the heat of battle, where we saw Reed, looking like someone had just beat the shit out of him, telling his teammates to bear with him just for a little longer, as they were on the verge of defeating them. Sebek then arrived at the scene with a smile on his face, where the demons who were already there began to roast him for being a half-demon. Reed was surprised at what he meant by half-demon, pondering whether it meant that he used to be a human and got turned into a demon. One of the demons mentioned that he was a magic swordsman, which shocked Hydra since the demon army wasn't meant to have any magic swordsmen among their ranks. Sebek then blatantly mentioned that he wished to scatter the battlefield and kill a whole lot of people, which left Reed with an open mouth, realizing that all that he wished to do was kill. Reed then came to the conclusion that all magic swordsmen were rotten to the core, and he was going to make them pay for their sins. Sebek then added that the idea of ridding the world of war is utterly ridiculous, as he thought war was something to be preserved for posterity. Sebek then mentioned that he was pleased by Reed's existence, since there needed to be guys like him to keep the war going, but he himself had a job to do. He then mentioned, while pointing his magic sword at Reed, that his magic sword bore the name of Apopes and whether he would be able to survive it. Moments later, Reed noticed a completely new aura from Sebek, as if he were a different person. Just then, a messenger bird flew in, displeasing Sebek because he knew it wouldn't bring any good news. The bird informed Sebek that he had been dismissed from the Goblin unit and was to relocate to the Western and Eastern theaters immediately. Cedo was surprisingly enthusiastic about it, so he turned his back and left their unit peacefully. The other demon called him a worthless bastard, telling him to at least finish his job, but Sebek disagreed, telling them to do it themselves since they claimed it was such an easy task. He then instructed Gabiroku, the demon who had brought him to the battlefield, to show him the way out. After he left, the other demons decided to attack the hero team, launching an assault on Hydra that left her disoriented. Reed advised her not to push herself and stay behind due to her perceived lack of skill. He decided to subdue the enemy in a single swoop, using his sword and mana for a multi-target attack. Amazing Hydra. Angelica planned to use a fire spell, asking McLean for backup. Meanwhile, Hydra was ready to fight with everything, even if it meant risking her life. A few moments later, Hydra and Angelica appeared worn out. Reed ordered McLean to use his healing magic on them, but they discovered McLean was down on the ground and motionless. Later that night, the hero team, excluding McLean, gathered around a fire where the air was filled with gloom. Angelica asked Reed if he planned to make her fulfill the roles of both an attacker and a healer. Reed, annoyed, responded that he was still trying to figure something out. Hydra observed the scene and criticized Reed, expressing disappointment in their journey. Reed snapped, questioning Hydra's criticism and pushing her to the ground, accusing her of hypocrisy. Angelica enjoyed the spectacle and told Hydra that her martial arts were insufficient to defeat monsters, considering her lack of magical training. Reed and Angelica deemed Hydra weak and discussed her limitations against the Demon King's executives. Feeling the pressure, Hydra bowed and begged for mercy, fearing disgrace to her clan if expelled like Cedo. Angelica, proud of Hydra's display, ordered her to find Cedo and bring him back. Angelica slapped Hydra for talking back and demanded obedience, threatening to treat her like a useless slave upon her return. After Hydra left, Angelica mentioned she only liked Reed's company, and he agreed. They planned to resume their journey once rested, and Angelica wished McLean were still alive. We see Cedo hunting in a bush with a bow and arrow in hand, where he lets off a shot which he managed to target so perfectly that even a GPS would be impressed. As he went to retrieve his prey, we hear the voice acknowledging Cedo's skillful act, and it appeared to be a man named Ryadu, who was a very popular and legendary sniper, who then told Cedo that they had done enough hunting for that day, so he suggested that they both got something to eat, and Cedo agreed with his idea 100%. It had been 5 days since they had arrived at Benjamin village, so he and Satiz had been helping all around the village with things like provisions and hunting for the markets. While Sito and Ryadu were eating, Ryadu mentioned that Sito was quite the fast learner, but Sito, being modest, said it was actually because he was such a great teacher. However, Ryadu noticed that Sito was also quite the klutz, as he was always falling over when it came to carrying stuff. He also wondered how was so good with a bow and arrow was so shit when it came to doing regular house chores. Sito then randomly mentioned that he could crack the wooden bowl which he was using to eat like it was a porcelain, as if that was something to brag about. Although Sito never imagined that he would meet the great Ryadu Anacondel, he also mentioned that many children looked up to him, including himself. But Ryadu told Sito to be quiet, saying that he was no one's role model by any means. Ryadu went on to say that he was just a mass murderer who took people's lives while hiding in the shadows. Ryadu then told Sito something important, that not prying into people's past was a rule which was respected by everyone, which Sito understood. On Sito's way out, while walking, he noticed an elegant view filled with wildlife and houses. He sat down on a hill while wondering whether there were places like that which still existed, and while he was observing the great scenery, we see a person walking up the hill and called for Sito, and it appeared to be Killam. Killam was on patrol, which was why she was wandering the whole village. She asked Sito whether he was done helping out for the day. Replied saying that he was done, and he also mentioned that he got treated to lunch while he was with Ryadu. Killam remarked that Sito was lucky because anytime she was with Ryadu, his replies to her were always brief and cold, talking more of being treated to lunch. She was feeling a little bit jealous because she wanted to be friends with a hero too. Sito remarked saying that he probably wasn't a good match with boisterous people. Killam was about to make an outburst based on what Sito had just said, but before she could utter any more words, she realized that what he said made sense, and it was probably the same case for the man whom she fell in love with, because he had dumped her like hot garbage even though he was so loyal to him. She paid for his food, booze, gambling, and everything else. She also worked her ass off to make sure she could provide these things for him. She then ran through her life savings, which led her to take a small loan from the barracks, which made her to be dispatched to the village. She mentioned that he was a brilliant mercenary and was also the corps commander at a particular point, which was what she admired so much about him. Sito understood the scenario that a man who was so skillful had stolen her heart, and he mentioned that he wished he could meet him. Killam goes on to say that Holmes was her desire. Sito was absolutely shocked hearing that. At least it could explain why he felt they were so similar. After Killam had shared her story, they both bid themselves farewell, and Sito began to understand why this village was also called the Village of Weirdos. Meanwhile, when Sito had gone back home, we see him stuffing his face with a delicious pie which Satiz had prepared. She mentioned that Scarlet had taught her how to make it, and it consisted mainly of the popular fruits in their area. She then patted herself on the back by saying that it was better than the ones at the restaurant, since they had been working non-stop. Satiz suggested that they took the day off, so Sito asked her what she had in mind for tomorrow, so she replied saying that she was thinking of them both going for a picnic on the outskirts of the village, which made for great scenery. Sito was bamboozled on hearing the word picnic. Satiz then explained to him that it was like an excursion of sorts where people enjoy by relaxing and enjoying the scenery. Later that night, Satiz mentioned to Sito that he was free to sleep since he always woke up way too early. He explained that it was because he had been helping Ryadu with work lately, and was also going to wake up a bit later than he usually did. To overcome Sito's clumsiness, Satiz then challenged him to pour her some tea without pouring or spilling anything. Sito felt that he was up to the task, saying that he wasn't the same person which he was on the first day. After Sito had completed the challenge successfully, we see them both sitting down on the couch, where Sito mentioned that drinking tea felt a lot more luxurious than drinking nothing but water. Satiz then remarked saying that there was no harm in a little luxury, and the picnic tomorrow was going to be even more luxurious. On hearing this, Sito was excited and couldn't wait for tomorrow, which pleases Satiz. Later that night, the hot bath was ready. Satiz urged Sito to go for the first bath, which he agreed to. Satiz then wondered how she would go about giving a good wash to a dirty boy like Sito who took quick showers. While Sito was taking in the refreshing steam from the bath, he began to admire the bathroom, which was as a result of a modification by one of Satiz's intricate spells. It was so good that it posed a threat to the accommodations in the city. Sito then considered all the adults he had met since he had arrived at the village, who he perceived to very interesting and nice. He also considered that fact the Satiz loved fruit pies, so he made the decision of staying just a bit longer. Satiz then walked into the bathroom while Sito was still in there, saying that she knew that he wasn't going to wash himself properly, so she was there to help him out. Satiz was dressed in a single towel, and at the sight of her hot body, Sito almost had a seizure while asking her what the hell she was doing in there. She replied saying that it was obvious that she was there to teach him how to clean his body properly since he was a filthy loser and wasn't cleaning himself the right way. So she told him to sit his ass down because she was going to ensure that he washed himself properly. She began the wash by running her soapy fingers through his hair. Due to his anxiety, Sito concluded that he was gonna die today. However, as Satiz washed him, he admitted that he was unaware of this particular method of washing oneself. Satiz told Sito to remain still so that she would be able to wash him properly. But that wasn't his main concern as Satiz began to push her watermelons against his back. He felt them but didn't say anything about it aloud. Satiz noticed so many scars on his back which weren't just battle scars, but were also signs of torture, and she feared that they weren't going to fade away. After she was done with his back, she asked him to take care of the front himself, because she wasn't trying to get booked for child abuse. Sito grew even more nervous as Satiz began to bathe herself behind him. However, he made sure that he didn't look at her. Unfortunately for him, during this whole scene, he appeared to have grown a boner and had forgotten how to calm himself down. They were both in the bath with their backs touching. Satiz exclaimed that the hot water felt great as if it had washed all of her worries away. And as Sito's boner grew even stronger, he decided that he couldn't bear it anymore, so he immediately fled the bathroom. After he had left, Satiz realized that she had been a little too assertive towards him. After leaving the bathroom, Sito gasped in relief and decided to get dressed before Satiz was to come out of the bath. He observed Satiz's clothes and stretched his hands in that direction, hoping to try them on, but immediately resisted the temptation. There was a loud noise, so Satiz rushed out of the bathroom while asking Sito what she had just heard. He reassured her that everything was fine. She then handed him a glass of water, saying that he was probably dizzy from staying in the bath for too long. Moments later, she asked whether he was going to bed now, which he replied, giving a positive response. Satiz teased him by asking whether they would be sleeping together again. Sito got nervous once again and fled the scene while telling her goodnight. Although, Sito came back to thank Satiz for taking a bath with him, which she found to be a very strange way of expressing gratitude. The day ended by them both wishing themselves a good night. The next day, it was time for their picnic, so while they were walking to their destination they observed the beautiful scenery which was popular in the Benjamin village. They decide on a spot where they would take their lunch. As the picnic basket is uncovered, we observe some delicious delicacies that were prepared solely by Satiz. Sito then sunk his teeth into a sandwich and was pleased at how meaty it was. Satiz then told him to take it easy as the food wasn't going anywhere. Being in such a large space, Sito mentioned that he felt so tiny in comparison, which Satiz felt the same about. Sito mentioned to Satiz that he never had the chance to enjoy the landscape before, so he was grateful that he got to see one with her. Satiz noticed that Sito was feeling sleepy, so she suggested that he took a nap, and she would wake him up a while later. While Sito slept on Satiz's lap, Satiz mentioned to Sito that where they were felt somewhat nostalgic. She guessed that it was perhaps his ancestors had been in that situation before. She found it a mystery how even though you visited a place which you had never been to or seen before, one would still experience that feeling of nostalgia and deja vu. Moments later, Sito had woken up and Satiz inquired about how he had slept, and he confirmed that he had rested well. Now that Sito had rested, Sito was just realizing how serene the environment was. He decided to go for a walk, so Satiz offered to tag along with him, but before she knew it, he was gone without trace. He then appeared to be at the bottom of a deep hole. However, he was not distressed but rather told her not to worry as he had discovered something very intriguing. Satiz climbed down the mysterious hole and landed onto the ground while wondering whether the cave they were in was an archaeological site or just a Minecraft cave. They observed some weird standing statues which were known as totem poles. Totem poles were statues used to worship ancestors and spirits. They were rumored to have been made by a tribe that used to live in their lands ages ago. Satiz mentioned that these particular totem poles were pretty old and were nothing like the ones which she had seen in previous eras, seeing that the wood was as hard as a rock. The word totem meant dimension and casualty, so Satiz assumed whether they were built with that in mind. Just then Sito had made a sudden realization that it was an altar that stood before them. Satiz made another discovery, being that it was not just any old and random altar but rather it was a tale of monsters. Apparently, centuries ago, the monsters were divided into many factions, but all eventually divided under the Demon King's banner, forming the Demon Army. However, there was a faction that didn't come under the Demon King's authority. This faction was named Wendigo, who were known as various spirits who embodied the will of nature. To sum it all up, the room with them both were in was built for the worshipping of the Wendigos, popularly known as the Land of Wendigos. Sito acknowledged that all they had discovered that day was a pretty cool, but suggested that they head back. but Satiz disagreed with a bit of crazy in her eyes, saying that she wouldn't ignore something of such high historical importance. So Sito sat his ass down and waited for her to be done admiring the past, as he found it an uncommon thing for Satiz to be so invested in literally anything. Sito realized that she was so energetic, just like when she did all sorts of things. Once Sito had realized what he had just thought, he decided he needed to cool his head off. Sito looked at the altar and noticed a figure behind the went there, and upon inspection, he observed a spooky hooded figure which left him speechless. It turned out that Satiz had been calling out for him, but he didn't answer, so apologized to her, saying that he had looking at that hooded figure for a while, so he showed it to her, but when she looked there was nothing there. The next day, while Sito was with Ryadu, he explained what he had experienced yesterday in that spooky cave, and Ryadu came to the conclusion that the place which they had visited was definitely the land of Wendigos. Ryadu suggested that Sito paid a visit to a man named Gendrar, who was a descending shaman from the Yeller tribe who formerly occupied the land, saying that he might have further information about the land of Wendigos. A couple of days later, Sito arrived at a strange-looking house where he met Gendrar, who mentioned that he was expecting Sito's arrival and welcomed him inside and offered to make him some black tea which was famous for calming souls down, while Sito was still baffled at how he knew his name. While they sat down, Gendrar enlightened Sito about the totem pole which him and Satiz had witnessed, and mentioned that a special characteristic of the one which they had witnessed was called invariability, and it also symbolized death. He mentioned that the particular altar which they had entered was used to worship the late Wendigo named Ahaz Patel, who was a supreme being to the people of the Yeller tribe. They believed that Ahaz Patel had existed since the world was embodied in nothingness, and he used his body to create all other forms of life and everything which they saw around them. And it apparently took him thousands of years to complete his creations which make up the world today. Sito then thought that it was one hell of a story, and wondered whether it was a myth. They believed that all their lives would eventually return to Ahaz Patel, so they didn't fear death, as their bodies would return to earth and would be used as nourishment for the nurturing of new life. However, those who went around despising people thoughtlessly would incur the wrath of Ahaz Patel. Sito then asked whether the mass of tentacles with a hood which he had seen at the altar was Ahaz Patel. This statement made Gendrar drop his teacup due to the realization that Sito had actually seen him. Sito then mentioned that his Satiz wasn't able to see him, so he might be mistaken, but Gendrar told him that he wasn't mistaken by any means. Apparently, Ahaz Patel's portrait had disappeared a long time ago, but Gendrar himself saw it when he was a child, and no other human apart from those in the Yeller tribe had been able to see him. So it seemed that he considered Sito special. Sito then thought to himself why Ahaz Patel had appeared before him. He assumed he angry at him because he had taken so many lives to survive. He then asked Gendrar whether Ahaz Patel might have been after him, so Gendrar replied, reassuring him that he wasn't, or even at the very least, he doesn't take souls before they come to him. He added that there was a possibility that Ahaz Patel was just testing him. Sito mentioned that he had always felt death lurking nearby, so it felt a little late to tell him that he was just being tested. Gendrar found his statement very intriguing and decided to leave him with a warning, saying that shortly he and his companion may receive an unexpected visitor who was an exhausted woman whose eyes were filled with madness and roaming the land like a sad and lonely ghost. Sito heeded his warning by saying he understood. Gendrar granted Sito divine protection from the Grey Totems, and Sito was on his way. Gendrar was fascinated by Sito as how he wasn't showing the eyes of a soldier, but rather the eyes of a swordsman. Perhaps he had the untapped potential to overcome great challenges. Gendrar still wondered what it was that Ahaz Patel had seen in him. Meanwhile, we observe Hydra walking like a mindless zombie while chanting Sito's name. Later that night, Sito was having trouble sleeping because the news he had gotten from Gendrar, since he had gotten kicked out of the hero party. He wondered who else would want to see him. He then decided to get out of bed and go for a stroll in an attempt to clear his head. While he was outside, he observed how pretty the moon was, and continued to walk around for a bit. After he had strolled for a while, he concluded that coming outside was the right call, seeing that he felt sleepy and was ready to go to bed. Suddenly, he heard some footsteps, so he brought out a blade which he would use to defend himself. He turned his back and spotted Hydra holding her arm while maintaining a crooked stance, saying that while the hero team had been working their asses off, he had been in this village living the very ideal and perfect life. Sito asked Hydra how she had managed to find him. She replied saying that it was simple, seeing that she gathered intel on him which said that he and a beautiful woman were present in this village. It took Hydra several days to get to the village, and she encountered several monsters and bandits along the journey. Sito noticed that she appeared to be different. although she wasn't in the best condition. She urged Sito to come with her since the hero team needed his power more than ever currently, calling him a bloodthirsty killing machine who would do anything to increase his kill count. On hearing this, Sito retracted his blade and disagreed to follow her, informing her that he was no longer a soldier, and was not going back to that shit hero team. He apologized for all the trouble which Hydra had gone through to find him and told her that he wanted to live his kind of life. But before he could even finish the sentence, she punched him right across the face, notifying him that he was coming with her and didn't have a choice, but Sito still disagreed. She then said that if he wasn't going to come with him, she was just going to kill him, as she raised her sword to land an overhead slash on Sito. It was immediately caught by Satiz, who asked her what the actual fuck she thought she was doing. Hydra falsely accused Satiz of being the lady who had seduced and brainwashed Sito. Satiz held her blade and shattered it with a single palm. She then asked Sito to let her beat the shit out of Hydra, saying that she wasn't the same weak lady who he found in the forest. Hydra smiled and revealed a substance she had obtained from the bandits' leader which looked like a pill. Hydra ingested it and began to undergo body mutations. Satiz immediately knew that it was a magic drug that was used to temporarily boost a person's power, and was also confident that she couldn't defeat her with just the magic drug. Hydra charged at Satiz while accusing her of using charms on Sito which would make him follow her like a lost puppy. Satiz countered by landing a calculated blow at Hydra's gut and followed that attack by landing an overhead kick right on Hydra's cranium. Satiz remarked, saying that she wasn't going to waste her time arguing with a mind which was so rotten that it wouldn't even listen to simple reason. Hydra was shaken by Satiz's blows but wasn't going to take it lying down and proceeded to charge at her again while telling Satiz to shut the fuck up. Both their legs equally clashed together and Hydra won the following blow by landing a sharp elbow on Satiz's full chest. Injured chest. This made Sito shout in concern for Satiz. Satiz stated that she was just startled by Hydra's blow. Hydra commended Satiz for being as strong as the rumors had narrated as the head of the Demon King's army. Satiz corrected her by saying that she was no longer a member of the Demon King's army, and the same went for Sito. But Satiz assumed that she wouldn't understand anything which she said due to her current malicious state, so charged at her in an attempt to put her to sleep. Just before they clashed, the Killam rushed into the battle which threw Hydra off her game, allowing Satiz to land the final and winning blow which made Hydra fall straight to the ground. Killam ordered Hydra to halt in the name of Benjamin Village, but Hydra didn't appear to be moving anyway. Killam's interference brought the Hydra's attack to an end, and as for Sito and Satiz, they decided to leave the village a little earlier than planned. However, before they departed, they visited Scarlet's office to give a proper apology for any inconvenience which they both had caused her or the entire village. She also mentioned that the girl who attacked them was a member of the hero group and was there to bring Sito back. It also turned out that Mayor Scarlet was aware that Satiz was no human and was rather a demon who used to be Sito's enemy. Satiz was totally and utterly surprised that she knew that she wasn't human but still decided to let her stay in the village. Scarlet reminded Satiz that they were a village of eccentrics. Everyone came there for a particular reason, and that was the purpose of the village, to harbor lonely and undefined souls. Scarlet mentioned that she was going to leave their house untouched, and they could come back anytime they wished. On hearing all of this, Satiz broke into tears since she had always looked down on humans, but in reality, they were the ones who were watching over them. The mayor suggested throwing a departure party for them, but they refused, saying that it would be too much. But Scarlet replied saying that it was okay, seeing that the villagers would never turn down a party. We see Sito and Satiz traveling in a caravan, where Sito was counting all the provisions which they had generously received from Ryadu upon their departure. Satiz assumed that he must have been really fond of him. They both still felt indebted to the Benjamin village for accepting them, fully knowing who and what they were. They were truly a village of eccentrics, just as the rumors pled. They also expressed their gratitude to the driver of the caravan for offering to give them a ride, especially considering how far the next city was from their current destination. The driver told them not to mention it, seeing that the road which they took was a peaceful one since the wars were dying out, although there was still a war which bothered Satiz. So she mentioned that the heard rumors of the Demon King's army losing momentum and asked whether it was thanks to the intervention of the hero team to get insight from the driver. The driver notified them that it wasn't news that the hero's party had gone missing. Both Satiz and Sito were shocked to hear this. He also mentioned that there were rumors that they were last seen at a town with a large lake. That location sounded familiar to Sito as it was close to the spot which they had kicked him out. This driver had a really runny mouth, so he mentioned that there were also rumors of the incidents of assaults on caravans increasing, which implied that it were the hero team who were responsible for this banditry. He also asked them to keep this information secret as it was just a rumor. The driver had enough of the sad talk and suggested that they all take a break and go to have lunch. Cities then offered to treat him to some of their provisions. While they sat and were eating, Sito pondered what the caravan driver had said about the hero's team being missing. He saw Reed as a true humanitarian who would do anything to promote human welfare, so it wouldn't make sense for the person who despised him for fighting with sheer brutality to be the head of acts such as banditry. He suddenly remembered that Hydra's behavior had changed drastically. He knew that something was definitely up. It wasn't that Sito was curious about their matter, it's just that there was simply nothing he could do for them, seeing that he wasn't the right person for that. He understood something during his encounter with Hydra, that he didn't want to live as a soldier anymore, but as a regular person with cities by his side. They were still off the caravan, and while Sito was catching some fresh air, he turned his back and Ahaz Patel had appeared right behind him. He was confused why he would appear now of all times. Ahaz Patel then appeared to be walking away, which baffled Sito. Satiz was unable to see him, so she inquired about what Sito was staring at. Sito wanted to make life easy, so he told Satiz that it was nothing. He then noticed a letter on the ground, so he picked it up. At the same time, Satiz called him to come back to the caravan because it was time for them to leave. So Sito stuffed the letter into his jacket and rushed towards her while asking what the next city they were heading to was called. She replied saying that Ulain Donog, also known as the Adventurer's Kitchen. Meanwhile, on a battlefield, we see Gabiroku inquiring about Sebek's condition. Sebek then emerges with his sword named Apopes on his shoulder, saying that Gabiroku was looking good. He was either trying to riz him up or just being friendly. Gabiroku asked Sebek whether Sir Orc was safe, and he replied saying he didn't give a shit. Sebek mentioned that he had just arrived to give them back up, and it appeared that Sir Orc just dumped the duty of rear guard on them, abandoned his men and fled the scene. Sebek proceeded to call him a worthless loser, but Gabiroku warned him to watch his mouth, like he could do something about it. Sebek pointed out that he was done with his duty as a rear guard, as the battlefield was littered with enemy corpses. He also mentioned that any massacre less than this would be satisfactory for him. A while back, the Orc King's soldiers were almost on the verge of being annihilated. Gabiroku asked for Sebek's opinion on an issue, which was whether he felt that the demon army had a future. He asked this because the morals and disciples of the army were as low as Sebek's hair, and due to their reoccurring losses, the failing soldiers are being purged without having a say, and at that rate the army was doomed to self-destruct. Apparently, everything began to go left ever since Satiz had been evicted from the army. Sebek agreed that things were bad, but he didn't give a shit since it was the Demon King who gave all those orders. Gabiroku didn't think that it was okay since it was the Demon King who gave the orders. Gabiroku felt that the Demon King didn't have to humiliate warriors so heavily before executing them, just like he had done with Lady Satiz before her expulsion. Sebek was sick of Gabiroku's complaints and told him to go to the Demon King's face and share with him that he had fucked up and was a worthless and useless loser. This statement left Gabiroku speechless. Sebek, knowing that they were powerless compared to the Demon Lord, just advised that they move to the next battlefield like good little boys. Gabiroku, on the other hand, was concerned that the only thing that he cared about was fighting. Sebek emphasized that he just wanted to fight and defeat the strongest opponent, and also wanted to die at the hands of the strongest opponent. He was certain that he was going to meet his match eventually. Gabiroku was marveled at Sebek's mindset and called him a very odd dude. He was even more concerned about how nobody, neither the veteran soldiers nor the higher-ups, were aware of close they were getting their asses handed to them. Sebek appeared to be the last hope of the demon army because coming across a warrior who was stronger than him wasn't likely in the slightest. Sebek asked what they had received instructions on their next battlefield from the Demon King. Gabiroku brought out a sheet which held the instructions. Sebek yoinked it out his tiny hands and read the sheet. It said that they were to go to the land of Wendigos and destroy it. Sebek mentioned that he recognized the place known as the Adventurer's Kitchen, and for some reason, he felt like he was going to have a great encounter there. Sito was busy sleeping on Sati's lap when she woke him up, telling him that they had almost reached their destination. She opened the curtain and sunlight almost turned him into a blind man. Seeing that he had just woken up, she asked him to take a look at the beautiful city called Ulain Donog. Sito marveled at the fact that he could witness the sea, as it was his first time witnessing it in his entire life. He couldn't believe his ears when he heard that they could catch all kinds of fish that lurked in the sea, which meant that he would be able to eat a foreign food known as sushi. It was so delicious and popular that restaurants all over the land had put it on their menus. Cities had never tried it before either, so they made it part of their plan to find a place which served sushi once they reached the town after they had found accommodation, of course. A while later, they arrived at Ulan Donog. After they had gotten a lodge, they decided to head to the sushi restaurant to put an end to Sito's cravings. They walked into the restaurant, which they both knew was far too fancy for them, and shortly after, the waiter ushered them to their seats. The head chef proceeded to offer them something called otsumami, which sounded really fancy, but was simply just raw fish cut into small pieces. Once Sito had heard this, he began to sweat profusely just at the thought of tasting uncooked fish. The waitress placed a dish of sushi before them, but they feared to even have a bite. Another waitress informed them that they were to eat the sashimi with the chopsticks, but the sushi could be eaten with their bare hands. The amount of experience he had with chopsticks was just the same amount of luck he had while rizzing girls up. 0. He managed to somehow pick up the sashimi with the chopsticks and shoved it in his mouth hole. To his surprise, he found it delicious and delectable. Satiz went ahead to try the sushi, so she dipped it in some soy sauce and shoved it down her hole. I meant mouth hole. And just like Sito, she found the sushi to be very delicious. She enjoyed the unique texture of the fish, mashed together with the taste of vinegar and the spiciness of the soy sauce. They now understood why sushi was such a popular dish, and the chef was pleased to learn that they enjoyed his food. Moments later, a group of ugly, worthless, and retarded lowlives waltzed into the establishment when the restaurant was already full, saying that they wanted to try the infamous sushi and sashimi. The waiter informed them that the restaurant was already full, but they didn't give a shit, so asked her to tell them all to get the hell out. One of the chefs warned them by saying that if they were to continue to constitute a nuisance to the restaurant, he would call on the guards to deal with them. However, the chef's threat didn't move them in the slightest, and they decided to use him to start the harassment. Just before they had the chance to, one of the bandits noticed how hot it was and invited her to come and play with them. And we both know what he meant by play. The ugly bandit went on to caution her not to fight back at him, and his gang were the best swordsmen in the world. Meanwhile, Sito gave another one of the lowlives a dirty look, so he noticed it and said he despised cocky brats and attempted to intimidate Sito by saying that the other brats who messed with him had met a deadly fate. He thrusted his sword at Sito and he was able to make a Sito kebab. Sito grabbed a cup filled with hot water and poured it directly on his face, which made him scream in agony. Sito then restrained him by dropping him on the floor with his hands behind his back, which utterly shocked everyone who was watching. The bandit, who was restrained on the floor, ordered his gang to kill Satiz first and then come to his aid. One of the other ugly bandits obeyed his colleague's instructions and yelled at Sito to release him or else he would kill Satiz. But Sito didn't think that was such a good idea. Suddenly, the bandit complained that his sword was feeling a lot lighter. Before he knew it, his sword began to fold like it was origami, and then Satiz landed a clean blow across his cheek while telling him never to touch her so casually again. The leftover bandits began to flee until they were stopped by someone dressed in a metal suit, bearing the name Osiris, and was also the captain of the garrison of the city, and was also deemed the world's strongest magic swordsman, who stood strictly for justice and nothing but justice. The bandits thought that they weren't going to let him catch them, but there was no escaping Osiris' magic sword. He then asked the bandits to repent for coming to that marvelous city and also for causing a commotion in his favorite restaurant. By the time he had arrived inside, Sito had already taken of the care of some criminals. Sito was marveled at how such a talented magic swordsman who stood strictly for justice existed in this cruel world. Moments later, he noticed Sati's presence and asked what the hell she was doing in there. Osiris was devastated that his favorite restaurant had been attacked by some filthy low-lives, but still found it odd that Satiz, the former leader of the demon army, had subdued them with a puny little boy. Osiris stared at them both while they sat on a couch while thinking to himself that the Satiz he knew would just use her tongue of seduction on him to make life a lot easier. However, she appeared to give off a timid aura. What he found even more intriguing was the fact that her attention wasn't focused on him, but on the boy who sat beside her. He concluded that he was going to get to the bottom of it and began to introduce himself to them. Sito grasped Sati's hand, which was the same as him saying, "I got this." He introduced himself and straight up mentioned that he was a magic swordsman as well. Once Osiris had heard this name, he immediately recognized him, saying that he had numerous rumors about him as the legendary boy soldier. Sito humbled himself by basically saying he was just a filthy errand boy to the hero team. Osiris laughed while he remarked that he liked Sito's eloquence. However, Osiris' two brain cells couldn't comprehend what a former demon army leader and a legendary boy soldier would be doing together. So Satiz narrated how she got her ass booted from the demon army, after which she had run away and met Ceto along the journey, who had also been booted from the hero team. Osiris came to the understanding that they were just a pair of rejected losers who wanted to leave nothing but a peaceful life together, which he found it terribly romantic. Satiz then asked what he was going to do with them. He replied saying that on his will, he would let them off the hook. But unfortunately, he was part of an organization, so he couldn't just let them go, although he had a steep level of authority. He thought for a while and decided to ask them to come back tomorrow, which was a very dumb decision to make for people which you planned to arrest. One of the guards gave his piece of advice by basically saying that he was being a total and complete dumbass by letting them leave the premises unsecured. Osiris replied, telling him not to be absurd and adding that it was all part of his master plan. But the first thing on the agenda was to monitor and observe them. He also mentioned that one scary fact about magic swordsmen was that once they meet another of their kind, they suddenly have the urge to determine who is the strongest. He ordered the guard to ready the training arena because the following day, he was going to challenge Ceto to a duel. Meanwhile, the rumors of the hero team being engaged in banditry were proven to be true, as we observe Reed and Angelica looting from a caravan that they had attacked. While Angelica was busy admiring the loot which they had acquired, Reed stood in the background, feeling disgusted by his actions and questioned himself for how long they were going to keep on doing this. These actions of killing and robbing the innocents of their hard-earned wealth were the kind they were meant to despise and not mindlessly practice. Reed became fully delusional and began to give himself the excuse that they had no choice but to accomplish it. And from then on, they would stack up on good deeds to make up for the sins which they had committed. Angelica heard his muttering and asked him for how long he was going to keep the false righteousness act on. She asked him to forget it and proceeded to show him all the riches which they had acquired. She mentioned that they could get new equipment and would be able to sleep in fluffy beds, all while dragging a corpse. Later, while Reed was still trying to validate his banditry in his head, he had a vision of innocent souls to which he had slaughtered and began to scream like the worthless loser he was. Angelica told him that if he was going to blame anyone's ass, he should blame his own because it was due to how useless and worthless he was that they had to use banditry as a last resort. She reminded him that it was thanks to her thieving idea that they had a carriage to ride in and food to eat, all while giving him a cold and spooky stare. She suggested that they go over to the cliff end to discuss some matters. Reed was so exhausted that he would agree to literally anything. Once he has arrived, he marveled at how beautiful and merciful the moonlight was to filthy and disgusting scumbags like themselves. He continued to praise the moonlight and even went as far as saying that it was cleansing his dark and dirt-filled heart. He then asked Angelica what she had brought his out there to discuss, and before he knew it, she had shoved him over the cliff. However, he managed to grab onto the cliff with one of his arms with hope that she was going to tell him that it was an April Fool's prank. Obviously, it was no prank, and she continued by dramatically stomping on his hand so that he would let go of the cliff. This betrayal had taken Reed by surprise, so he asked her what in the hell she thought she was doing. She replied saying that it was obvious that she was cutting off a weak link like him off, so unfortunately, this was the end of the road for him, and it was his time to see Jesus. However, she told him not to worry because, after his demise, she was going to continue their crusade to subjugate the Demon King. But before that, she planned to go to a city, eat at the best restaurant, and get a bath too, considering how stinky she was and never showered. She would go on to recruit new adventurers and build a brand new party with her at the center, and if her new party were to subjugate the Demon King, her name would be down in the history books, with everyone singing her praises. Reed was angered by all her mocking statements, so he used his other free hand to grab her foot and threw her down the cliff. Her screams echoed loudly as she fell to her doom. Reed trembled in fear at the sudden realization of what he had just done. Murder. He fell to his knees and began to cry like a worthless piece of baby garbage, when he suddenly started to get delusional again, saying that he wasn't to blame, and it was all an act of self-defense. He then started to laugh maniacally while making the statement that he was going to defeat the Demon King and save the world. Meanwhile, Osiris had invited Ceto and Satiz to the training arena. On reaching there, they both asked why he had called them to such a place. Osiris replied saying that it was very obvious, so he issued a challenge of a duel to Ceto. However, it was a one-on-one battle where killing was forbidden. The duel would end where the fighter's opponent was to forfeit, or the referee deemed him unable to continue. They also had 5 minutes to decide a winner. Satiz asked Osiris why he went to such lengths just to duel with Ceto. He explained that it was simply his nature as a magic swordsman to determine who was the strongest when he met another magic swordsman. He added that on a normal occasion, this would be a duel to the death, but he had sympathized with them based on the circumstances which they found themselves, which he found to be very generous of himself. Satiz was about to roast his ass for forcing Sito to participate in a duel, but Sito unexpectedly walked forward, indicating that he was ready to fight. Satiz was shocked that he actually wanted to go ahead with the duel, while Osiris was pleased to see the fierce look in Sito's eyes. So Sito drew his magic sword and they both stood in the arena ready to fight.